Time for the Red Zone, our weekly extended look at Oklahoma football. I'm Jenny Carlson here in studio with fellow columnist Barry Trammell, OU beat writer Ryan Aber. Guys, after an off week that was anything but quiet around Oklahoma, it's game week again as the Sooners get ready to head down to TCU. 11 o'clock kick on Saturday. ABC is your network if you're watching from home. Ryan, now it's time to find out what is going to change with the OU defense. Last week it was a lot of talk. Obviously, Ruffin McNeil taking over for Mike Stoops. What is your sense at this point about how the defense will be different than when we saw it last?
Well, nobody's talked about specifics structurally of how the defense is going to work or specifics of some different players that we might see, although Ruffin McNeil did say that things could look a little bit different. But I thought Curtis Bolton probably had the most insight into the changes, and he talked about how much better he felt about the game plan for this game versus some of their game plans before. He mentioned the defensive line, as he said, Ruffin McNeil's the defensive line coach. I, being Curtis Bolton, identify as a defensive lineman, having played that pretty much his entire career before he got to OU. He said he feels good about it, and that matches up with what Ruffin McNeil did at Texas Tech in 2007 when he took over after 4 games. Because he got much more aggressive with his defensive linemen. Oklahoma's defensive scheme has been for the defensive linemen, just to protect the linebackers, let guys like Bolton, Kenneth Murray make plays. Maybe it's time that we see Neville Gallimore, Kenneth Mann, etc., making more plays on their own.
Barry, you buying the idea that the defensive line might be an area where we see the biggest change on defense?
Yes, but not necessarily, and it may be, sort of in attitude or aggression, all that kind of thing. But what's the chances they just sort of try the 4-3 more often? I mean, they've gone to this 3-4, and frankly, it's not done well. It's not working.
Well, especially now that they've got a little bit of depth back there with Marquise Overton and Tyrese Lott being available.
So, I mean, I'm thinking a little bit, try the 4-3. Teddy Lehman's been preaching it for years. Go back to the 4-3, and it's not 2002 anymore, but who knows? Maybe it'll work. I think anything's on the table after how bad they've been. Frankly, the old, against Texas, they'd have been better off trying the old zero linebacker set that was a disaster in Morgantown. It couldn't have been any worse. So anything's on the table. They had to buy. They had, made the decision on a Sunday with Mike Stoops, so they had a full 2 weeks. And in 1970 they had a full 2 weeks before Texas, and they trotted out the wishbone. So that's a much more serious change than anything they might do on defense. So anything's on the table: personnel, attitude, structure, alignment. Anything's on the table, and it's a great week to do it because TCU's offense is not very good. Got some people that scare you. They're not very good. They're the worst offense in the Big 12. Seems like a time to trot something out and see if it takes.
Now hold the phone here. I direct the conversation. Don't go transitioning to TCU offense just
rewind.
yet.
Wait, Paige, rewind.
All right, we'll get to that in a second. But Ryan, we talked last week about guys that might get out of the doghouse, if you will. I mean, Levi Draper came up, some guys like that. But are there some guys that you feel like just maybe on the field more and depended on more, as OU looks to really put its best guys out there and just try to stabilize some things?
Well, I think there's a couple that really stand out to me. First being Ronnie Perkins, who has played a lot as a true freshman, but there's been times when he's been off the field for long periods of time. It goes along with what I was talking about, defensive linemen. He's the guy who really stands out as maybe a guy who's got a chance to make plays. In the long term, Jalen Redmond is a guy who could see the field. He's a guy who we thought his season was over. Lincoln Riley said before the season there was no chance of him even playing a couple games. He was going to be out, come back next year after some blood clot issues. He was cleared a couple weeks ago. He's been back practicing. I don't think he's a guy who's going to contribute on Saturday, but looking down the road, he's a guy who has a chance. And then I think Caleb Kelly is an interesting guy. Ruffin McNeil said that they were going to try him in a couple different spots, which to this point, he's been sort of locked in on that weak side linebacker job behind Curtis Bolton. We've seen even Brian Meade played ahead of him a little bit. But when Caleb Kelly's been on the field this year, he's been effective, not as effective as Curtis Bolton, but he's a guy who there's no doubt has the athleticism to help them out in certain situations. So I think you could see him used in some different roles. And then the other one is Trey Brown, the cornerback. It's been a 3-man rotation, but Trey Brown's a guy who has played the least out of those 3. And I think we could see that elevate as his production has gone way up.
Yeah, definitely a lot of things to watch as this defense gets back out on the field. But, Barry, you made reference to the fact that TCU's offense is not very good. And, you know, TCU under Gary Patterson, which they've been under Gary Patterson for a long time, has been mostly known for their defense. But in past years, they've had good offenses, you know, Trayvon Boykin and different guys, whether quarterback or running back, that have been pretty good. But this offense, put it in context for us, it is not good at all.
Well, they've given the ball away is the biggest problem. Sean Robinson's a very talented quarterback, but he is turnover prone this season, and it's just killing the Frogs. They've got all kinds of weapons, Turpin, Rager. They got all kinds of playmakers, but when you have turnovers, it debilitates your offense, and that's what's happening with TCU. And this isn't just a random fumble here or a tip pass. Sean Robinson has not taken care of the ball, and that's why Gary Patterson is considering using another quarterback on Saturday. We'll see if he does. I don't know. But that's why this Oklahoma defense, it's a good opportunity. They've not been getting turnovers. They've not been getting stops. The best kind of way to stop the opposition is to take the ball away from them. This Oklahoma team can't tackle. If you can't tackle, take the ball away from them. Maybe you can get the ball. So, you know, this is going to be their best chance to shine. I think they've got a confidence problem. After what we saw in Dallas, I mean, their self-psyche has just got to be in tatters. They've got to be questioning themselves. They need a bolt of confidence, a bolt of good news. Stopping a Big 12 team would do that.
You know, Ryan, to think about how bad TCU's offense has been, you know, it sort of goes through my head. Could this overly inflate the way Oklahoma feels about its defense? But to Barry's point, is overinflation a little bit okay at this point? Like they're so, you know, decimated emotionally and mentally. Is that just going to be okay with Oklahoma if they get out of that game and think, wow, we're world beaters or something?
Yeah, any boost of confidence for this defense right now will help. Barry mentioned their psyche's got to be in tatters right now, and I don't think there's any doubt about that, given the way that they played recently. You know, they had started acting like they had some confidence defensively early in the season, but then that crumbled, especially after Army, after Iowa State did what they did. You know, Baylor was a little bit up and down. They had some good moments in that game, but then in Texas, it just all cascaded down on them. So any positive momentum is good for this defense right now. I don't think there's any worry about them getting overconfident moving forward.
On the other side of things, the TCU defense, as bad as they are offensively, again, Gary Patterson has a great defense, Barry, and Oklahoma has a historically good offense again. So the clash of these two, what's the challenge in your mind for the Sooners as they get ready to go against another Gary Patterson-led defense that's pretty darn good?
Well, I mean, it's a challenge, but the truth of the matter is the class of the Big 12, when you're talking about individual units, is the Oklahoma offense. That's the thing that sort of set out. I can tell you, you know, it's the Big 12's best offense against the Big 12's best defense. And the worry and the concern and the discomfort level is much higher in Fort Worth this week than it is in Norman. This Oklahoma offense is historically good through 6 games. It's surpassing anything the Baker Mayfield offenses did in terms of production. And Baker and the rest of the Big 12 lit up even TCU. Look at the scores of OU TCU the last few years. 52-46 in 15, I think it was. Last year, 38-20, 41-17. The Sooners score. They score basically on everybody. They scored on Georgia. They're going to score on TCU. The question is, can Gary hold them into the 30s? You know, Texas is a really good defense. Sooners went for 45. So can TCU keep OU in the 30s, 35, 38, and somehow, you know, find a way to hang onto the ball and score? You know, that's really the key to this game. TCU's not going to win this game 24-20. Yeah. That's not going to happen.
You know, we talked about the fact that TCU might be changing quarterbacks. Sean Robinson might be on the way out. I'm going to assume Kyler Murray is probably going to be the starter on Saturday down
a fair bet.
down in Fort Worth. So put his performance, I mean, just pan back for a second. I mean, we've been so focused on defense and obviously focused on that Texas loss, and rightfully so. But Kyler Murray, give us a big picture view of things and just the season that he's had halfway through.
Well, it's just been incredible, and as good as we've talked about this several times, but as good as Baker Mayfield was over the last 3 seasons, and last year won the Heisman Trophy, Kyler Murray is as good or better so far this season. And that's not to say that Baker Mayfield isn't better than Kyler Murray overall, but to this point, Kyler Murray has been his equal at the very least. And it's just been phenomenal to see this offense transition from Baker Mayfield, the best quarterback in OU history, to Kyler Murray and not miss a beat and be even better. Like Barry mentioned, this is a historically good offense. He's got all kinds of weapons out there, Marquise Brown and CeeDee Lamb being 1 and 2, but also the way they've been running the ball, even without Rodney Anderson, really gets overlooked. Trey Sermon, at the end of that Texas game, the Longhorns defense, which is pretty good, wanted no part of him. There was they showed no will to stop him on that last scoring drive. Marcellus Sutton ran tough. Kennedy Brooks has looked fantastic in the small glimpses that we've got of him the last few weeks. And that OU offensive line sort of, I think people forget about it a little bit, although they haven't been probably as good as I think a lot of people thought they would, but they've still been pretty darn good.
Barry, when Rodney Anderson got hurt, I remember Lincoln Riley standing in front of us and the world at his press conference and basically saying, we're just going to put another guy in there. And I thought, hold on, you're talking about one of your best players who just got hurt. You're going to put another guy in there, but isn't that selling short how good Rodney Anderson is or something? I mean, that just didn't add up to me. It's added up. I mean, it's a little bit crazy to think.
They do miss Rodney Anderson. Don't misconstrue. They do miss Rodney Anderson. He's a wonderful player. He's probably OU's best football player before he got hurt. However, the depth at tailback is fantastic. The way they use tailbacks is they know what they're doing. They get them in space. They get them in positions where they can succeed, and when they don't, they're still good enough to make yardage. Trey Sermon leads the Big 12 in yards after contact, I think I read in your story. So they're very deep here. Now, if they lose Kenneth Mann or Kenneth Murray or, well, I'm hard-pressed to think of somebody that actually tackles on the defense, but if they lose a pretty good defender, they're wringing their hands and they're holding their head and they're saying, what are we going to do? You don't do that when you're losing a tailback with this crew. I mean, this is a deep and talented group of tailbacks. The yards after contact from Sermon, even from Sutton, who we think of as a scat back, he's breaking all kinds of tackles. Kennedy Brooks looks good. If you're going to lose somebody, I said this at the engineering dinner the other night. I said, sort of like if you lose an engineering professor at OU. It's not that big a deal. You got 20 other good ones, great ones. Just plug somebody in. It's the same at tailback. It's different for other positions, but not at tailback. They're very deep.
Yeah, they've been really, really good. All right, guys, let's get to the picks from our conversation. I think people will probably know how we went on our picks, but we've all got Oklahoma winning, and Ryan, we'll start with you. You've got a pretty comfortable win, 45-21 for the Sooners.
Yeah, I just think that TCU is having so much problems keeping a hold of the ball that will continue to be an issue. Oklahoma's had some interceptions this year. They haven't forced many fumbles. I think just one fumble recovery for their defense. I look for that secondary to have a couple of good things go their way. I look for them to sort of feed off of the newness of Ruffin McNeil and have some success defensively. That's not speaking to their success in the future, but I think this week they'll be successful, and I don't think that TCU's defense is going to be able to slow down Kyler Murray and company enough to keep this game close.
Yeah, definitely an interesting matchup there. But, Barry, you got a little bit closer score. You got Sooners by touchdown and a bit, 35-27.
I've never been more confident of a score in the history of my career. I actually just did the picks, and I did my picks this week the way I always do them. I do them in about 45 seconds. 20 games, 45 seconds. I just pick out a number and away we go. And then, so I did that Tuesday morning, I think, 35-27. Then yesterday, I sit down and I figure out my Big 12 efficiency ratings, and I use those to give you a projected score. It's not a prediction, but it just tells you this is what the stats say the score in general is going to be. OU 35, TCU 27. I'm not making this up. I'd take this one to the bank, folks. Take it to the bank.
All right. Well, I'm going right in the middle of you two. I've got OU winning, but a little bit more than Barry, a little bit less than Ryan. I've got 41-27. I do think that it is going to be a hard thing for TCU to keep up with Oklahoma and that offense. They've even in games where the defense has struggled, the offense has shown no cracks. They just keep going right along. I think it's going to be a big offensive day, but definitely a get-well day, too, for that Oklahoma defense down in Fort Worth. Again, 11 o'clock on Saturday, ABC is your network for Sooners and Horned Frogs. Be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.